There was also a deeper sense of inevitability, far beyond the medical, that Sri Bhagavan knew what was appropriate and sought to give us strength to endure his body's death. Indeed, this long, painful sickness came to appear as a means of preparing us for the inevitable parting, which many had first felt they would not be able to endure. Kitty, my daughter, who was at a boarding school in the hills, was told about it in a letter and wrote back, "I am so very sorry to hear about it, but Bhagavan knows what is best for us." Her letter was shown to him, and his face was radiant with pleasure as he commended her wisdom for saying, "What is best for us, not what is best for him." Bhagavan had immense compassion for those who grieved over the suffering, and he sought to appease their grief, not the easy way by removing the suffering and postponing death for a few more years, but the fundamental way by making them realize that the body was not Bhagavan. As he said, "They take this body for Bhagavan and attribute suffering to him. What a pity! They are despondent that Bhagavan is going to leave them and go away. Where can he go, and how?" For some weeks after the August operation, there seemed to be an improvement, but in November the tumor appeared again, higher up the arm, near the shoulder. In December, the fourth and last operation was carried out. The wound from this never healed. The doctors admitted now that they could do no more. The case was hopeless. And if the tumor returned again, they could only administer palliatives. Bhagavan's birthday, the Jayanti, fell on 5th January 1950. Sorrowful crowds gathered for his 70th birthday, which most now felt to be his last. He gave darshan and listened to many new songs and composed in his praise. Some he read through. The temple elephant from town came and bowed down before him and touched his feet with its trunk. A Rani from North India was allowed to take a motion picture of this scene. There was festivity, but with an underlying sadness of apprehension. Many felt already that it was a matter of weeks or days. Now that the case had been pronounced hopeless, Sri Bhagavan was asked to say himself what treatment should be tried, and he said, "Have I ever asked for any treatment? It is you who want this and that for me, so it is for you to agree about it amongst yourselves. If I were asked, I should always say, as I have said from the beginning, that no treatment is necessary, that things take their course." Only after this, homeopathy was tried, and then Ayurveda, but it was much too late. Sri Bhagavan kept to his normal daily routine until it became physically impossible. He took his morning bath an hour before sunrise, sat up to give darshan at fixed hours, morning and evening, went through the ashram correspondence and supervised the printing of ashram publications, often making suggestions. After January, he became too weak to sit in the hall and give darshan. A small bathroom with an anteroom had been constructed across the drive, just east of the hall, and towards the end, he remained there. There was a narrow little veranda outside where his couch was put, and right up to the end, the devotees whom his sickness had drawn in their hundreds to Tiruvannamalai were still able to have darshan. He would let nothing interrupt this so long as it was still possible. The devotees would sit morning and afternoon on the hall veranda facing him. Later, when he had grown too weak for that, they would file past the open door of his room, morning and evening. One day his condition caused alarm and the darshan was stopped. But as soon as he was able to take notice, he expressed displeasure and ordered it to be resumed. A group of devotees daily chanted prayers and devotional songs for his recovery. He was asked about their efficacy and replied, smiling, "It is certainly desirable to be engaged in good activities. Let them continue." The tumor returned just above the unhealed wound. It was up near the shoulder now, and the whole system was poisoned, so that severe anemia set in. The doctor said the pain must be terrible. He could take scarcely any nourishment. Occasionally he was heard to moan in his sleep, but he gave no other sign of pain. From time to time the doctors came from Madras to see him, and he was courteous and hospitable as ever. Right up to the end, his first question was whether they had received food, whether they were well looked after. His sense of humor also remained. He would joke about the tumor as though it was something that did not concern him. A woman in her grief beat her head against a pillar near the room, and he looked surprised and then said, "Oh, I thought she was trying to break a coconut." Speaking to the attendants and to Dr. T.N. Krishnaswamy, doctor and devotee, he explained, "The body is like a banana leaf, on which all kinds of delicious food have been served. After we have eaten the food from it, do we take the leaf and preserve it? Do we not throw it away now that it has served its purpose?" On another occasion he said to the attendants, "Who is to carry this load of a body, even after it needs assistance in everything? Do you expect me to carry this load that it would take 4 men to carry?" And Bhagavan said to some of the devotees, "Suppose you go to a firewood depot and buy a bundle of firewood and engage an attendant to carry it to your house. As you walk along with him, he will be anxiously looking forward to his destination so that he can throw off his burden and get relief. In the same way, the jnani is anxious to throw off his mortal body." And then Bhagavan corrected the explanation, saying, "This exposition is all right as far as it goes, but strictly speaking, even this is not quite accurate. The jnani is not even anxious to shed his body. He is indifferent alike to the existence or non-existence of the body, being almost unaware of it." Once, unasked, Bhagavan defined moksha, or self-realization or deliverance, to one of the attendants. "Do you know what moksha is? Getting rid of non-existent misery and attaining the bliss which is always there. That is moksha." It was hard to give up hope that even if the doctors failed, he might still put aside the sickness by his own power. A devotee begged him to give but a single thought to the desirability of getting well, as this would have been enough. But he replied almost scornfully, "Who could have such a thought?" And to others who asked him simply to will his recovery, he said, "Who is there to will this?" The so-called other, the individual that could oppose the course of destiny, no longer existed in him. It was the non-existent misery that he had got rid of. Some of the devotees made it a plea for their own welfare. "What is to become of us without Bhagavan? We are too weak to look after ourselves. We depend on his grace for everything." And Bhagavan replied, "You attach too much importance to the body." Bhagavan clearly implying that the end of his body would not interrupt the grace and guidance. And in the same vein he said, "They say that I am dying, but I am not going away. Where could I go? I am here." Mrs. Telayarkan, a Parsi devotee, besought him, "But Bhagavan, give this sickness to me instead. Let me bear it." And he replied, "And who gave it to me?" Then who gave it to him? Was it not the poison of our karma? A Swedish sadhu had a dream in which the afflicted arm opened and he saw there the head of a woman with gray hair, disheveled. This was interpreted to mean that it was the karma of his mother that he assumed when he gave her moksha, but others saw the woman to signify all mankind, or Maya, the illusion itself. On Thursday, the 13th April, a doctor brought Sri Bhagavan a palliative to relieve the congestion in the lungs, but he refused it, saying, "It is not necessary. Everything will come right within 2 days." That night he bade his attendants to go and sleep or meditate and leave him alone. On Friday, the doctors and attendants knew it was the last day. In the morning, he again bade them to go and meditate. And at about noon, when liquid food was brought for him, he asked the time, punctual as ever, but then added, "But henceforth time doesn't matter." Delicately expressing recognition of their long years of service, he said to the attendants, "The English have a word, thanks, but we only say santosham. I am pleased." In the morning, the long crowd filed past the open doorway, silent with grief and apprehension, and again between 4 and 5 in the evening. The disease-racked body they saw there was shrunken, the ribs protruding, the skin blackened. It was a pitiable vestige of pain. And yet, at some time during these last few days, each devotee received a direct, luminous, penetrating look of recognition, which he felt as the parting infusion of grace. After darshan that evening, the devotees did not disperse to their homes. Apprehension held them there. At about sunset, Sri Bhagavan told the attendants to sit him up. They knew already that every movement, every touch was painful, but he told them not to worry about that. He sat with one of the attendants supporting his head. A doctor began to give him oxygen, but with a wave of his right hand, he motioned him away. There were about a dozen persons in the small room, doctors and attendants. 2 of the attendants were fanning him, and the devotees outside gazed spellbound at the moving fans through the window, a sign that there was still a living body to fan. A reporter of a large American magazine moved about restlessly, uneasy at having been impressed despite himself, and determined not to write his story till he got away from Tiruvannamalai to conditions that he considered normal. With him was a French press photographer. Unexpectedly, a group of devotees sitting on the veranda outside the hall began singing Arunachala Shiva. On hearing it, Sri Bhagavan's eyes opened and shone. He gave a brief smile of indescribable tenderness. From the outer edges of his eyes, tears of bliss rolled down. One more deep breath, and no more. There was no struggle, no spasm, no other sign of death, only that the next breath did not come. For a few moments, people stood bewildered. The singing continued. The French press photographer came up to me and asked at what precise minute it had happened. Resenting it as a journalistic callousness, I replied brusquely that I did not know. And then I suddenly recalled Sri Bhagavan's unfailing courtesy and answered precisely that it was 8:47. He said, and I could hear now that he was excited, that he had been pacing the road outside, and at that very moment an enormous star had trailed slowly across the sky. Many had seen it, even as far away as Madras, and felt what it portended. It passed to the northeast towards the peak of Arunachala. After the first numbness, there was a wild burst of grief. The body was carried out onto the veranda in a sitting posture. Men and women crowded up to the veranda railing to see. A woman fainted. Others sobbed out loud. The body was placed garlanded upon a couch in the hall, and the devotees thronged there and sat around it. One had expected the face to be rock-like in samadhi, but found it instead so marked by pain that it gripped one's heart. Only gradually during the night the air of the mysterious composure returned to it. All that night devotees sat in the large hall, and the townsfolk passed through in awed silence. Processions streamed from the town and back, singing Arunachala Shiva. Some of the devotees in the hall sang songs of praise and grief. Others sat silent. What was most noticeable was not the grief, but the calm beneath it. For they were men and women deprived of him whose grace had been the very meaning of their life. Already that first night and much more during the days that followed, it became clear how vital had been his words. I am not going away. Where could I go? I am here. The word here does not imply any limitation, but rather that the self is, that there is no going, no changing for that, which is the universal Atman. Nevertheless, as devotees felt the inner presence of Bhagavan, and as they felt the continued divine presence at Tiruvannamalai, they began to regard it as a promise full of love and solicitude. During the night of vigil, a decision had to be taken as to the burial. It had been thought that the body might be interred in the new hall, but many devotees opposed the idea. They felt that the hall was, in a sense, an adjunct to the temple. It would make the shrine of Sri Bhagavan seem subordinate to that of the mother, reversing the true order of things. The next day, by general agreement, a pit was dug and the body interred with divine honors in the space between the old hall and the temple. The crowd, packed tight, looked on in silent grief. No more the beloved face, no more the sound of his voice. Henceforth the lingam of polished black stone, the symbol of Shiva, over the tomb was the outer sign, and inwardly his footprints in the heart.